Good morning. This is Bill from Auto House of Naples and Curious Cars, or vice versa, on it's an unfortunately muggy Florida Thursday, I have to say. Yesterday it was kind of chipper and cool in the morning. This morning you can already feel the humidity, so I have very low hopes for how it's going to go for the rest of the day. I suspect it's going to be hot, humid, and shitty en route to a hot, humid, and shitty summer. So what are you going to do? You just got to keep hanging in there. But we've had our season. You get so excited in the middle of October. You know that the cooler weather is coming. You've suffered through June and July and August. And now the waning days, it's over. It's coming. It's now July that's beckoning, not November. So what a shame. Animals are at an absolute minimum this morning. The goats I haven't seen in a couple of weeks. I don't know if Peter killed them, gave them away. He claims they're still alive and back there somewhere, but if it's true, I haven't seen them, and I'm not going to venture in the back to find out. I saw a cat earlier, but it darted off, so hopefully it stays gone. And bird activity, I can hear a few of them, but they're not close. So with any luck, we're going to keep going animal free here. Yesterday, I had a horror story go on, an absolute horror story. If you guys remember, anyone who's watched, and God help you, for a long time, I was mildly restoring an old terrible Grady White, and it went for a while, and then I ended up going to work over at Auto House with Peter, and things change, and what changed was that I went from having spare time to having no spare time, because Auto House is run, more or less like the Gestapo. So if you're not constantly doing shit related to selling cars, then it's frowned upon. So the boat was just languishing. So I ended up selling it to Keith, our mechanic, and it hasn't run in 6 months. We loaded it on the trailer because it's a good old boat, good old Yami engine on there. And it's one of these horrible roller trailers. That's because I bought this thing from Chris, who is an absolute animal. A friend of mine, Chris. He just does everything wrong when it comes to mechanical things. Long story short, on the way back from the ramp, the boat flies off the roller trailer because the safety chain and the strap failed. So in the middle of the road, we're standing there on the side waiting for tow trucks, and it just was a living nightmare, an absolute nightmare. And that's the scene for starting this video today. I had a hell of a rough night. I really did. Oh, God, but what are you going to do? So, anyway, we'll get right into it. This is a 1969 Lincoln Mark III. This was not the birth of the personal luxury car, but it wasn't far off either. It was designed to compete with the Cadillac Eldorado, which had been reborn as a personal luxury coupe in 1967. You remember that front-wheel drive Eldorado. And it was doing okay, and so Ford wanted something to compete with it, and Lee Iacocca at that time was vice president, riding high on his success with the Mustang, so he wanted to take something and make it work. He was also a bottom-line guy, and the Ford Thunderbird at the time was a very expensive, very nice car, and it was starting to wane in the market a little bit, so Iacocca, in his brilliance, said, let's do something with that platform to put something in the Lincoln division that's going to sell and help Lincoln out, which was losing money, and spread out the cost a little bit. So everyone was pondering it, and then one night, Iacocca's on vacation somewhere, out at the country, has a brainstorm, calls up the design captain, not as vice president of design, but the guy in charge, Dave Ash, interesting guy, the Strawberry Design Studio. It was sort of an alternative design studio within Ford, and says, man, put a Thunderbird grill on put a Rolls-Royce grill on a Thunderbird and put a spare tire hump on it, and let's see what happens. And he did, and most people in Ford hated it, except for two key guys, Lee Iacocca and Henry Ford II. They both loved it. So because of that, it started going forward, and that eventually became this Mark III. Let's set the stage for a minute, though. You've got 1960, well, the car came out in 68, but we're going to call it a 69 model, and for the sake of that, we're going to say that it was at its infancy, and the people driving it would have been experiencing 1969 more than 68. So what exactly happened? Well, you had Nixon was inaugurated after lots of shit that happened before that. He finally became president. You had the moon landing. That was a rather big deal. One small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. The Soviets did a spacewalk, but nobody remembers it because of the moon landing. They also sent a probe to Uranus. They sent a probe to Venus, and they communicated with Venus for a few minutes, like almost an hour before that died. Wait, we get the sprinklers coming on. This is going to be fantastic. They're going to hit me in a minute. But anyway, so nobody remembers the Venus thing with the Soviets, again, because of the moon landing, which was a rather big deal. The Concorde had its first test flight in '69. What the hell else happens? The Beatles did their last public performance on the rooftop of Apple Records. That became a rather famous thing. And Project Blue Book ended. That was the United States Air Force investigation into flying saucers, which they said there weren't any, and that satisfied everybody who was worried about that. You also had Woodstock, a bunch of animals flying around a muddy field taking acid, which actually sounds like great fun, but I'm honestly glad I wasn't a part of it. The Montreal Expos were created, which just legitimized Canada. It just legitimized them. So I don't know if Major League Baseball should have done that. Gas was 35 cents a gallon. The average car was about $3,200. PBS was created, Sesame Street. That came out for the first time. That was a big deal. And most importantly, the U.S. Supreme Court in Stanley versus Georgia declared that the state may not prohibit mere possession of obscene materials for personal use. So that was, important to all of us, and we can thank Mr. Stanley for his contribution to society back then. Monty Python's Flying Circus came out, bell-bottoms, tie-dyes, that was sort of the look of the day. Movie-wise, you had The Love Bug, you had Butch Cassidy, you had True Grit, Midnight Cowboy, Easy Rider. You had, of course, giant war protests going on at the time, partially with those muddy hippies going to Washington, getting really angry, trying to overrun the Congress. And, there was all kinds of violence and death and mayhem and riots and that sort of thing. And, at the end of the day, it worked because the war ended. If you remember that great shot of people on the roof of the U.S. Embassy trying to cling to that last Huey chopper leaving. That was a big deal. Technology-wise, the microprocessor was invented. ARPANET, the precursor to the internet, came out. And the first ATM, which really, those things should have a breathalyzer on them, honestly. But that also was the order of the day. So '69 was a pretty big year. Very good year for murders, mind you. You had the Manson murders that happened. You had the Zodiac killer, that guy who never got caught. And then, of course, you had Chappaquiddick. So murders were running rampant in 1969. And upon that time in history, out came this Mark III. And again, nobody put this grille in the front of this car, which is let's just admit it, its most distinguishing feature. It cost 10 times what any other grille cost Ford. It was a pain in the ass to engineer and install. It was an absolute ripoff of the Corniche grille that had come out a couple of years earlier on the Rolls-Royce. And most, again, internal Ford people said it was backwards thinking. It was the stuff of wooden wagon wheels and crank engines. And Henry Ford II didn't care. Lee Iacocca didn't care. And the public loved it. So it ended up being an absolute success. Ditto that Fugazi spare tire hump in the rear, which, again, it was... It's not cutting-edge automotive stuff. It's a throwback to the past. But it was ballsy at the time because nobody else was doing it, and it was thought of as being a little bit passé. And yet there it is on this new Continental Mark series, which Lincoln brought out to compete with the Eldorado, and the public just ended up absolutely loving it. Oh boy, so there it is. Now this car is, I'm not going to get into it because I've done all this recently, but this is convoluted. In 56 and 57, there was a Lincoln Mark II that was supposed to be the successor to the original Lincoln Continental, which came out when Edsel Ford wanted one to roll around Florida and sleep with his mistresses in. And the Mark II was a very expensive, overbuilt car that was not a commercial success at all. Just didn't work for them, but it was a fancy car. If you remember, at the same time, a little bit earlier, there was an Eldorado that was also very fancy, expensive, and amazing car for Cadillac, but it was not a commercial success. And then in 67, Cadillac, despite the Eldo's original problems, names another car the Eldo, the personal luxury coupe, which one could argue was, beginning to be the originator of it. And they had no shame in rejuvenating that name and using it. And then when they were considering the name for this car, Dave Ash, the head of the Strawberry Design Studio, thought he loved the name Merlin because it combined Lincoln and Mercury, obviously, not too bad, and, was, of course, a wizard in, the King Arthur times, and also was the name of Rolls-Royce engines that everybody knew from World War II that were badass. Like, look at the cats going apeshit. Yeah, they're screwing with each other, and now they're going to come over and tag team me. But anyway, the Merlin engines were a big deal, and everyone remembered them. So I have to admit, I think that's a pretty cool name. But because GM went with the Eldorado, and Iacocca wanted to go head-to-head with him, he thought, screw it. We already competed once with the Mark II. Let's bring out the Mark III and compete with Cadillac that way. And they did, and this car was born as the Continental Mark III. And even though the original positioning envisioned it as being, a higher-end version of the Thunderbird, but not the top of the line, it then became the top of the Ford Motor Company lineup, the most expensive Lincoln, the flagship of Ford Motor Company, and that was a very big deal. Well, here's where Iacocca's brilliance came in, but it also screwed everything up too. But Iacocca thought, okay, you've got this four-door Thunderbird and coupe Thunderbird, which are very expensive, very nice cars, but they're not profitable. So he thought, okay, we're going to use all that development money and put all of this. They built this Mark III on top of the four-door Thunderbird frame, which cut down costs considerably. It made it much, much cheaper to come up with this car, and because a lot of existing parts were used, even to the structural parts, it was a very inexpensive car for Ford to come up with and produce. Unfortunately, while it was a screaming success in that sense, and Iacocca said it was as big a success to him as the Chrysler minivan or the Mustang, so I mean, this is a big deal. What it also did was it sort of brought about the original badge engineering issue, which became so convoluted and so overused that it ended up screwing all the car companies, 15 years later, which, there it is. So brilliance begets mediocrity at some point. So this car eventually led to the Cimarron and Cavalier debacle. I like that. Yeah, my English teaching nun would love that word. Debacle. It's all where you put the... there is a quick aside. I don't know why I thought of this, but I did. I lived in Dublin for a little while, and a friend of mine, Sean, nice guy, worked at the embassy. And one of his famous stories that I still remember to this day was how they would catch people who claimed to be American but weren't. People might go to the U.S. Embassy, say they were mugged, they had no papers, and could we get back to America? And they had to test to see that these people were who they were. Of course, back then, even the 80s, 90s, the tests weren't as, there wasn't as much stuff, so they had to test them. And one of the way, they put them in a room and they interrogated them. And one of the things that they had to do was insert the word, and forgive me for this, it's lewd, but it is what it is. They had to insert the word fucking into the state. So apparently only an American can do this. You have to take the word, for instance, Tennessee, and put the word fucking in it. And any American's going to go, yeah, okay, Tennessee. Okay, and then you do the same with Oklahoma. And I go, okay, Oklahoma. It seems second nature to us, but apparently if you're, a spy who's learned to speak good English and you could almost pass for an American, that is the one thing you can't do, is put the word fucking into a state. So I guess they would be there like saying, Oklahoma, fuck 'em up, or, they wouldn't quite get it right, and that's when they knew they were Al-Qaeda, and they'd, fly them off to Gitmo or wherever they put them at that time. So anyway, there's a stupid little aside. So Merlin was going to be the name. It became the Mark V. It instantly sold well. Iacocca claims that it outsold the Eldorado in the first year, which had been the long-term goal, but that wasn't really true. If you remember, Iacocca loved these mid-year releases, the 64.5 Mustang, because he thought it gave the cars a chance to get out in the market without any other news going on. And he did the same thing with this Mark. So it sold 7,000 copies, which were called 69 models, but they sold in early 68. And in fact, this is a very early 68 model. It was made in July of 1968. And they made 7,000 of them, and then in the next year, in 69 proper, there were about 23,000. If you add those two numbers together, yes, that does, beat the Eldorado's 69 sale figures of 28,000 or something. But yeah, it's not really fair. Typical Iacocca crap. It did a few things. It debuted the 460 engine, part of the 385 series Ford big blocks, or they're known as the Lima engines because they're made in Lima, Ohio. It was the biggest cubic inch variety that had been made, and even though it was just fresh and new at this point, it was also the last of the pre-emission Ford big blocks that put out, like 365 horse, 500 pound-feet of torque. 69 was a fantastic year because it was just before all of the emission stuff and bumper stuff and safety stuff came in, and late enough to be at the peak of the horsepower war. So this thing has quite a motivated engine underneath it. Unfortunately, it also weighs 4,900 pounds. That engine's working hard for a living, and also 150 pounds of sound deadening materials in it, which this thing's heavy, so it really needed that engine. I mean, if this car had continued in its form through 79, it wouldn't have been able to get out of its own way with one of those anemic Malaise era big blocks that they were putting in stuff at the time. It had a top speed of about 125, and anyway, was a pretty good, powerful, quick car at the time. I tell you what, I'm going to pause it for a minute. My hand is going to sleep holding this stupid camera. We'll pick it up in a second. All right, well, I've moved the car forward, not just to avoid the sun, but hopefully avoid the sprinklers as well. The sun is already putting leaf shadows on the side of the thing. What the hell? I need to get here earlier. But look at the hidden headlights on this thing. Again, one of the ways it was distinguished from the Thunderbird at the time, these body-colored headlight covers, 6 feet of hood, 5 more feet of door, and then God knows another 6 feet or so of quarter panel. This was a big, big car. It was also a hardtop coupe. You can see I've got all the windows down, so there's no window at all from front to rear. That was done away with for safety standards in the early 70s for the most part. If you remember, we just did that Grand Prix, which had the colonnade top, and that was in part to act upon rollover standards that the government required. But back now, 69, this was a hardtop convertible sort of thing. That's what they called them. Don't take me out for that. But it was nice to get rid of all the side window and let a lot of air inside. Anyway, let's start inside the trunk. I believe this has a trunk release. These cars were pretty well equipped at the time. Again, the average car was $3,200. This car started at like $6,500, so double the cost of an average car. And then when you started getting into options and equipment, it would get much, much higher, up into almost the $10,000 range. So that was the price of 2 pretty well-loaded Mercury Cougars. So this thing was not cheap. Okay, you've got an enormous trunk, absolutely lovely. I think we have the original spare. This car has 13,000 miles, by the way. 13,000. I don't know if this is the original or not. It would have to be a bias ply. These Mark IIIs, it was the first car that the radial tire came out on, but not until the 1970 model year. Anyway, sorry all my crap's in here. We've got 2 bags today, but you've got a very nicely finished trunk, you know, no exposed rockers or otherwise, all that, you know, it's incredible condition for what's now, God, 50 years old. Underneath the jack stowage, you've got the jack, which is what you'd expect to see there, and everything lovely in the rather large trunk, so awfully nice stuff. Yeah, I'll tell you another departure. The prior Continentals, you know, that 4-door Continental convertible and the sedan, you know, the one Kennedy was shot in, God rest him, that was considered to be more conservative than Cadillac's rather gaudy options at the time, and it worked for Cadillac and did not work for Lincoln, and that was one of the things that Iacocca wanted to address, and that's why he made this car a little bit ostentatious. All of a sudden, you know, common guys like me and you and and uncommon guys like me and you know what I mean. Look, blue-collar guys lusted for the Mark series. They lusted for it. They did not lust for the 4-door Continental at all. Not the same way they did for the Cadillac stuff. And this car changed that, and that's part of why it was a huge sales success. And because it was cheap to develop, because it was built on the Thunderbird platform, it was a huge moneymaker for Lincoln. It turned the whole division around. They had been losing money on every luxury car they made. All of a sudden, they're making $2,000 per copy on this thing and selling a bunch of them. And very quickly, it made, you know, like almost $250 million for them, recouped all their development fees almost instantly, and just absolutely turned the company around. And I guess that's why Iacocca is considered to be such a successful CEO. But anyway, let's have a look under the hood. But again, all that stuff came back to haunt these flies. I fucking hate flies. It's summer, so it means they're coming. But anyway, all that, which was, oh God, this is so hard one-handed. There we go. Which was great at this time, and it worked well at this time. That went on to screwing everybody over later on. You know, the way that Cadillacs were aspirational, and all of a sudden they became semi-affordable, so that not only was the rich guy driving them, but the guy at the golf course who put the bags in the cart of the rich guy might have a sedan or coupe de ville. That screwed over Cadillac eventually and sent their buyers over to Mercedes and other more exclusive makes. So, yeah, you know, they got to enjoy everything for a few years, but it came back to haunt them. Anyway, there it is. This Lima 460 4V actually stands for 4 Venturi, not 4 valve. And what that means is that it has this big giant carburetor 4-barrel under there, which, you know, almost single-handedly could have started the gas crunch. This thing chews a lot of fuel. And if you're worried about fuel economy, this may not be the car for you. That's made into what, their C6, C3 automatic? I always forget it. The big automatic. This was a big engine for, sorry, that's a double entendre. This was a big motor for Ford because they used it all the way through 98. You know, obviously they had stopped using it in cars at some point, but it was powering big trucks. I have this old shitbox motorhome that I bought to stay in at Sebring. It's an 89 model. I'd be too ashamed to show a picture of it, but it has a 460 Ford in it. And it was only replaced in 1998 by that Triton V10. And then all of the trucks that weren't diesel went to that. So they got a lot of miles out of this motor, no pun intended. It went on for a very, very long time and is considered to be one of the most stable and reliable big blocks ever made. So not a bad thing. It was also the architecture for the famous, you know, 428s, 429s. The prior Gen T-Bird had a 429 in it. And then, of course, it became the 460 as the cubic inch thing became a big deal. But anyway, all original under the hood of this thing, never been restored. This is just the way it is. This is a 12,000 mile car. You see this very cool plaque on here that gives you the engine and other little indicators, and, you know, still has stickers where they're supposed to be, and AC still works, and no restoration at all, just as it came from Ford, and nice to see. So very cool under that long, big, giant hood. These wipers, the next year, went hidden. They got underneath the cowling. This year, they're exposed. This car is finished in light green. That's the color. You think they could have come up with something a little bit more lovely. Let me run the headlights so you can see that. You just pull those on here. There's a little switch right here. I think we'll get, they don't quite work at the same time. I think we got a little bit of a vacuum issue, but there they go. They come up, and that was a distinguishing feature for this Mark series. And of course, the high beams beneath them. You could also get auto dimmers, which frankly, I'm glad this one doesn't have, because it ends up having this big freakish looking thing right here that detects oncoming cars. And while it looked cool in Space Age in the 60s when it was the Jetsons, now it just looks a bit weird and silly. So I think it's better that it has does not have that option. It has a darker green contrasting vinyl top, again all original. Lovely bits of chrome and bright work in the mirrors and the Lincoln emblem. This vent in the back was for flow-through ventilation, they called it. So air would come in from the front and under the dash and in the windows, flow out this rear vent here on the package shelf, and then flow through a tube and, or, you know, whatever, a duct, and come out there. So they called that flowing ventilation. I love the turbine look wheel covers. They were pretty fancy stuff, again, to make the Mark III look more spectacular. And of course, the Continental script is just beautiful to look at. Let's have a look inside. All right, your Canadians, they are going to be chipper as hell back here. No issues. It seats 3, but to look at it, you'd think you could really seat 4. I mean, this thing was a few inches shorter than a 70s Suburban, but it was 2 inches wider. I mean, this is a big car. In early models, you can see that script up there in the center. That went away, but in these, this was right on the cusp, actually, because it was supposed to have gone away in July, and this car was built in, well, it's maybe not, but it was slated to be built the 6th of July, but it still got that script, and still got some of the stuff the early Connies had. You see the switches back there for the light in the windows. You've got ashtrays, because everybody smoked. You've got all that lovely diamond pleated leather, including on the back of the seats, and you can just see this was a very luxurious place to be. Lovely stuff. Here's the build sticker I'm talking about. I don't know if that camera's going to pick up the numbers and stuff, but if you pause it, you'll be able to see some of it. But oh my god. All right, there's the color, which is H, that's light green. And then where do we have O6G somewhere? Yeah, right here for the date. And G is July, so what it means is this car was supposed to be produced on the 06 of July. That was the schedule. It might have been earlier, it might have been later, depending on how things were going. The seat switches, excuse me, I have to say, are in a bit of an inconvenient place down there. When the door is closed, it's hard to reach them. And Ford quickly remedied that by putting seat switches up on the armrest very shortly thereafter. More of that diamond tuck stuff on the door panels. Very nice treatment. Lovely big chrome switches. Nice stainless and chrome trim. The black contrasting carpet. You could just tell this was a very special car at the time, and very, very well made. Also, the wood steering wheel is lovely. One of the shames was they went away from this big horn ring and that terrific freight train horn. That became a pressure pad thing later on, and they did away with the ring. So that's one reason I'm glad this car is early. I do like that big horn ring. The seat. All right, and here we have 5 individual gauge pods facing you. Very, very fancy stuff at the time. This was only fake wood then. There were 2 different kinds you could get, and that went on to become real wood later. So in this early car, it's still just the fake wood. I like the real wood, but I imagine it doesn't last as long as the fake stuff. They also went from having white gauge needles to red ones later, and they went from having this sort of standard clock, which not working at the moment, to a Cartier clock with Roman numerals. So this one, again, another way you can tell it's an earlier model. But over here you've got your oil pressure, you got your fuel, of which you're going to need a fair amount. I like this, your 120 mile an hour speedometer with red lining from 70 onwards. You know you're breaking the law. And there you see just 13,000 miles on the clock. And yeah, I know it's, look man, if this thing had 113, you'd be able to tell, believe me. It's a 13. It was a bit of a barn find, this car. Sat for many years in a garage, covered with very good storage. And then the prior owner found it. It was never found, it was never lost, but he took it, he uncovered it. It was beautifully preserved, but he had to go through and clean up the fuel system, the brakes, and everything else to get it running good. So, and there are the sprinklers, wonderful. And they're probably going to hit us. Let's see how close they get to us. Peter better have them set up right. I swear to God, if they hit me, I'm going to be infuriated. Anyway, so there it is, just 13,000 miles on this unrestored car, which is just amazing. Love the chrome gear shift lever. There's your speedometer, your clock. You've got your directional indicators here, your high beam indicator here. You can't really see it that well, but there's a brake warning here. I presume that's dead and charge on the voltmeter, and your engine temp, nice stuff. This is interesting because what a weird place for a vent control, but on the top and the rearward spinner is where you can close and open that rear vent, that flow through ventilation, and then the front is your wiper control right there. I do like the Continental script. I like the map lights. I've got whatever, we don't have too much documentation with it, whatever we got is back at the shop, but it does have a trunk release button, and you just feel the quality in that. This is really before all that GM malaise stuff and Ford malaise stuff. This car was really well built. You're not going to see the dashboards peeling up and other crappy shit that happens cosmetically to cars that were built later on in the 70s if they're not meticulously cared for. I love the wide rear view mirror. I think it's beautiful. It says night and day, of course, with the little switcher there. You've got very nice vinyl trim. That could be leather, but probably vinyl. Sun visors. Expensive looking header panel. Almost looks Mercedes quality to me. And then this awesome row of warning lights up here for seat belts, door ajar, headlamps, and trunk open. So that was all very cool stuff. Also like these 60s style shoulder belts that just clip up to the top. I think that's really cool. And this being a split bench seat, has dual power and very nice and easy to operate. The ignition switch is down there next to the ashtray, which is actually quite small. And Dalton, who's the most giant asshole I know, I told him to take the ashtrays out and put them in the wash bucket and then put them back in when he's done. Well, of course he didn't put it back in, so I do love him. And I can't see it, but under the dash down here is more ventilation control. You can pull this. I'm not going to do it. Anyway, there it is, and that also changes the air control. And there's, of course, your climate control with air conditioning that's still working in this car. And, of course, your PRND indicator, which, interestingly, I do like that thing where it's just sort of a glassy, plasticky stuff that you see through. I don't know why I like it, but I do, and I like doing this. I also like the little Lincoln emblem. Anyway, in the 70s, they then moved this oh, God. What the hell was that sound? They moved this ignition tumbler from down here up onto the column because that's what the federal government said they had to do. And it's the sound of that big block coming to life and running very, very smoothly. What a nice engine in this car. All right, let's go for a spin. Oh, and of course, there's the Philco AM radio. Philco was a name like Bose at the time, I guess. We gotta wait for Peter's gate. I still think this thing has a little vacuum leak somewhere. It uses a lot of vacuum for the headlights and other stuff. And there's, like in these old Benzes, they're all vacuum, even more than this car. But I don't know, I just detect a little leak. But I think it's certainly livable, and from a collectible viewpoint, I don't know if I'd even go through and try to find it for the moment. The thing runs and drives fine. over-assisted power steering, ridiculously thin wooden steering wheel. Yeah, I don't know. I just love it. Let's get past this water. And look at the view out of the hood of this car. These giant slab fenders on the side that are raised, let me get this defog going, that are raised inches above the hood line. I mean, oh, that's not, yeah, that really is defogging beautifully. Absolutely beautifully. I'm sure it will in a second. In the rear view, you can see the two lights there on the package shelf that are indicating the brake lights are working. That's nice stuff. And there, now we're all nicely defogged. Let's go for a spin. All right, and the sun isn't that bad, so I think we can just keep going. Oh, that's AC on. Turn that off for the moment. But look at that expansive hood with the hump in the middle, all going towards the V. 6 feet of it. You just feel like you're steering a destroyer, you know, heading towards somewhere. I mean, it is such an incredibly cool car to sit in the driver's seat and operate and see this expansive hood in front of you. I guess because it's supposed to be some modicum of modern and sporty, they didn't put a hood ornament at the front, but I think I would have liked that. I do like having these windows down and letting all of the air in. The AC actually works in this car, so it'd be nice to do that. But the hell with it. I'm going to enjoy this hardtop coupe, convertible, whatever the hell they want to call it, and have the side windows down, something that got lost to us until some cars rebirthed it, you know, only recently. Oh, God, the government really screwed up. Oh, you know, I guess it's better. I mean, obviously, cars have, you know, cars today have no soul, but they are better cars, you know, and they fucking better be. They're made 50 years, 60 years later, but they don't have any soul. They really don't. They may get better mileage, you know, get more horsepower out of fewer cubic inches, all that stuff, but they have no soul. This does have standard front disc brakes. Here's an interesting little tidbit, is you could get anti-lock brakes on this car. That's not as modern as people think, and Mercedes didn't put it on the car first, as they claimed for many years. In fact, the Jensen Interceptor, which came out in 66, had a mechanical anti-lock braking system, not electronic, and it worked okay, I guess, but not great. But engineers developed it. This car, for, you know, $130, you could get a electronic anti-lock brake system, very crude, of course, but a true ABS system on the rear wheels. But the holy grail was getting it to be on the front wheels, which was considered much more difficult. And the car that did that was the 1971 Chrysler Imperial. There it is, an American Luxo tank was the first car with true electronic four-wheel ABS. And I'm sure I'll have lots of arguments in the comments about this, but that's kind of the way the world sees it, so I'm going with that. But anyway, not a lot of people opted for the SureTrack system on this car, the ABS system, because, you know, they might as well have a 8-track instead. But the brakes were good. They're hydraulic. Again, not in this year. The first radial tires you could get. The steering, ridiculously over-assisted. The brakes are over-assisted. It's got a giant perimeter frame that just crushes bumps and, you know, dips and everything else in the road. I mean, it just rides so unbelievably smooth. A lot smoother than that Civic, I promise you. And it's just a lovely car to navigate down the road. I'm not going to do it now because I'm driving, but this is a tilt steering wheel, which works great. And we've got 500 foot-pounds of torque, so even with this, you know, almost 5,000-pound car, it's pretty easy to dissect traffic. And it does have fairly modern tires. You know, when the guy brought it out of storage and made it into a driver after many, many years of being stored, he put tires on so he can drive it, and I'm thankful for that, so we can take it on the interstate. So just an amazing car to drive around, and man, does it get a lot of looks and attention. And it's still more or less underappreciated in the collector car market. It really, I should have put the windows on. I know this is noisy as hell. I've got something rotating inside the Sounds like the driver's side front wheel cover, so I have to have a look at that. But anyway, what an amazing car to cruise around. But personal luxury coupes have historically been really undervalued. Oh, that's not me at all. It's that stupid truck up there. Okay, I thought I had something coming apart at the front end. I'm gonna be that. Look at that thing bouncing. Oh, God. You know, when you drive old cars, you get paranoid. You really, really do. That's why I hate these cars that shut themselves off at traffic lights for gas savings. I mean, not only is it ridiculously hard on every engine component on the car, when you drive so many old turds in your lifetime, one shuts off at a traffic light, you go into a panic. Very, very smooth power, lovely to feather your way into the gas and get into the secondaries. And man, does it motivate this car, because again, unlike the Mark IVs and Mark Vs that came after it, none of this is thinking about it. 70 was the first thought of emissions when they put it in air pump. That was it. This car is 69, peak pre-emissions, peak pre-safety. Pretty cool stuff in my mind, even if it's not what Ralph Nader wanted, it's what I wanted. So I don't know where I was going, it doesn't matter. I'm going to keep the video a little bit shorter, and end it there. But this is a 69 Mercury. This is a 69 Lincoln Mark III. Not many of these cars were produced in total. Even though it was a sales success, they only made about 70,000 of them. So, you know, again, they made 288,077 Grand Prix over 1 year. They made 70,000 of these over 3 years. So their relative scarcity should drive them up in the collector market, and it has started to. Personal luxury coupes of the 60s and 70s have really started to ebb upward, which makes this car, with 13,000 original miles and all original condition, a pretty damn good investment in my mind. There's my little sales pitch, but you know, it's a shitload less than you go buy an old GTO for, and frankly, it's a lot more fun to drive in terms of cruising your way down the boulevard at night, you know, and people really love it. They give you the thumbs up, they enjoy it. You know, it's a tough thing with cars. I mean, you pull a Lamborghini down the road, you're going to get some people liking it, and other people, they won't even look at you because they think you're an asshole, and they're, you know, strong chance they're correct. When they see this car driving around, they figure the guy in it's going to be friendly and lovely and warm and comforting, just like the car. So it's if you remember that Honda campaign in the 60s and 70s where they were comparing themselves to Harley and Easy Rider, you meet the nicest people on a Honda, they would say, and they had pictures of people frolicking with strangers on their Honda motorcycles. That was true of this Lincoln as well. You're much more likely to meet a nice, happy guy driving this car than you are a, you know, old Chevelle SS 454. So with the windows down, it's noisy. I could put them up, but what the hell, I'm enjoying it. We'll have something fun, hopefully tomorrow. No promises, I'm gonna try. And otherwise, we will see you with the next one. But if you have an interest in this car, call the guys at Auto House of Naples, 239-263-8500, or on the web at autohousenaples.com. Thanks for having a look, and we will see you with the next one.